So let's move on to marine fisheries. Okay, the next chapter is all about global warming impacts on the ocean, but here we'll look at some aspects of human impact on fisheries, which includes impact of global warming on the ocean. Okay, so marine fisheries is obviously huge commercial fishing, many $1 billion, but there are complications, right? So the cost of fishing is often much more than the value of the fish that's caught. Like $120 billion could be spent to catch fish that's worth about $80 billion. Okay, there are many examples where fisheries are subsidized, and this affects the human impact on fisheries. Most of the fish, as we already said a few times, are caught on the continental shelves. More than 20% of that from upwelling areas, and the open ocean area make up only 0.1% of the surface area in terms of the fisheries. So here are the non-tropical shelves, 35.6, upwelling region about 21%, coastal upwelling regions and corals 18.7%, open ocean only 3.8%, and tropical shelves. Non-tropical shelves and tropical shelves are divided. Tropical shelves are 21%. Many complicated issues, but obviously the most discussed one is overfishing. So fish from standing stocks. I think I mentioned this before, where agriculture, for example, we take a piece of land, we irrigate it, we put fertilizers, we put seeds, and then we try to maximize yield, right? Whereas most of the open ocean or wild fisheries, we are not putting any seeds. We're not putting necessarily any fertilizer or anything. We're just trying to find what is a standing stock at any time. So you estimate the amount of biomass of a particular fisheries. For example, it could be tuna or anchovy or sardines or salmon or whatever else. And you try to define what is called maximum sustainable yield. Okay, so this is kind of a backward. In agriculture, you do yield calculations after harvest happens, and you try to maximize yield from the beginning, right? But in the ocean, you have maximum sustainable yield as a measure of how much we can take out from a standing stock without jeopardizing next year's revival of this fish stock. So it has to be done each year, it has to be done for a specific species, and it's an empirical calculation. It's a wide open ocean sometimes. There is no policing, people cheat, etc., etc. So essentially overfishing then happens because fish stocks are harvested too quickly, and juveniles, you don't necessarily wait for the juveniles to sexually mature and reproduce. For example, if skipjack tuna, let's say, has a life cycle of let's say 5 years, it grows to sexual maturity, let's say at 3 years, then breeds for a year, then let's say year 4 to 5, it's just senescing, which means getting old, and it's going to die. So that could probably the best time to catch it, because you're not going to affect the future population because it has already reproduced. But if you don't do that and catch the juveniles when they are not sexually mature to reproduce, then you are obviously cutting short the production process itself. So here is a map of the exploitation status of the marine fish. And the sad news is that there are very few that are underexploited. Most of them are depleted or recovering from depletion, overexploited, and fully exploited. Okay, there are some that are moderately exploited, so they can be allowed to increase fishing that type of fish, and so on. So the percentage of fish species you look at here Not safe to increase catch include almost more than 70 or 80%. So depleted and recovering 10%. We will see what steps can be taken to replenish or recover a species that has severely depleted or almost disappeared. Overexploited 19%, which means it's not sustainable anymore. Fully exploited 52%. Okay, only about 2% are underexploited. There are lots of other issues. For example, dynamites are used to blow up the corals to make the fish come out, which is really deadly because you're completely destroying the habitat of the fish that live in the coral. Right? That's not very smart. So moderately exploited is only 18%. So we will look at many details of the fisheries and how fisheries can be better managed. What are the methods that are used to manage now, and what are their deficiencies and how efficient they are, and so on. Okay, so fisheries obviously is a serious issue, has to be considered at multiple levels in terms of how the fisheries themselves are being affected by global warming, ocean acidification, which we will define in the last chapter, habitat destructions like mangroves being cut down, or pollution because of runoff from the continents, and so on, and of course heat waves in the ocean, etc., that we will look at in the next chapter. Okay.